In a world where magic belongs only to elite nobles and knights, Turan seems like nothing more than a lazy shepherd living on a remote mountain. But behind his quiet life lies a massive secret. 8 years ago, after discovering he possessed overwhelming magic, his mother made him swear a deadly oath to hide his power forever, warning him that the noble class would enslave him if they ever found out. That quiet life shatters when a house-sized shadow leopard slaughters a village elder. Unbothered, Turan tracks the beast down and casually obliterates it with a single, magic-imbued pebble. Shortly after, an angry mob tries to frame Turan for the elder's death, but he effortlessly beats them to a pulp, only to be interrupted by Kiorn, a 75-year-old wandering wizard hired to hunt the creature. Kiorn corners Turan, sensing something suspicious, but the tense interrogation quickly dissolves into an unlikely friendship over a late-night meal. The next morning, Kiorn heads into the forest, only to be ambushed by a hideous monster's Wraith, a vengeful abomination born from the rotting mana Turan left behind. Kiorn's magic is useless against it, and just as he prepares a suicidal last-ditch attack, a blinding beam of blue energy vaporizes the monster in an instant. Turan steps into the clearing, casually revealing his unbelievable strength to save the old hunter. Before they can even process the truth, an even more catastrophic dark entity erupts from the shadows. Kiorn desperately orders the boy to run and warn the village, but Turan just smiles. Gathering a storm of blue mana that threatens to turn the world upside down, the quiet shepherd prepares to finally test his true limits. Turan stands firm before the towering, grotesque mass of the monster, the air around him crackling with a raw energy that dwarfs everything else in the forest. As the blue mana swirls, he looks back with a surprisingly calm expression, admitting that he was actually curious about his own limits as well. Kiorn, however, is far from calm. He shouts a desperate warning that they have to join forces, insisting that no matter how much talent Turan has, this entity is far too tough to handle alone. But the momentum of the battle shifts before Kiorn can even finish his sentence. The veteran wizard is forced to a halt, staring at the ground in a state of pure shock as he realizes that, in this moment, he isn't any help at all. He admits to himself that he couldn't even react to Turan's last attack, concluding that stepping in now would only get in the way of a power he can barely comprehend. A massive surge of blue light erupts, illuminating the entire clearing as Turan pushes his mana to the brink. Yet, as the smoke clears, Turan looks down at his hand with a frustrated sigh, muttering a quiet, "Damn it." He launches himself at the beast, but his physical strike seems to pass right through the entity's core, leaving him to realize that the brute force he used earlier simply isn't working this time. Seeing the struggle, Kiorn finds his voice again and screams that you can't kill a wraith with physical attacks. Turan, skidding back across the dirt, looks up and asks the obvious question: if physical force is useless, then how is he supposed to kill it? He decides to pivot, thrusting his hand forward as he calls for fire. His gaze sharpens, his eyes glowing with an intense, kaleidoscopic light as he considers adding lightning to the mix. A massive burst of flame erupts, engulfing the creature's central eye in a roar of heat. But once again, Turan finds himself disappointed. He watches the flames flicker out and notes that even this elemental surge isn't quite hitting the mark. Kiorn is nearly paralyzed by what he's witnessing. He reflects on the basic laws of magic, thinking to himself that establishing proper causality is a fundamental requirement to apply a wizard's power to another living being. He stares at Turan in disbelief, wondering if it's possible that this boy doesn't even know the most basic common sense of a professional wizard. A sudden realization hits Kiorn like a physical blow. Turan was the one who killed the original monster and left it behind to become a wraith, which can only mean the shepherd has never actually absorbed mana a single day in his life. He is stunned that Turan is already this powerful without even knowing the proper sequence of making a fire before shooting it. Turan doesn't waste time on theory, he charges forward again, his movements a blur of speed and precision. He manifests a spinning orb of fire directly in his palm, ignoring the proper steps Kiorn is agonizing over. Kiorn watches the boy's back, noting that while making fire isn't difficult for any wizard, actually controlling it is supposed to require years of separate, intense training. To his absolute shock, Turan masters the control immediately, raising a pillar of flame high into the sky. Turan plants his foot, the ground cracking beneath the pressure as he prepares to unleash everything he has. He lunges, driving the concentrated fire directly into the wraith's core with a deafening explosion. The forest is momentarily lost in a sea of orange and red as the monster lets out a final, agonizing shriek. The abomination is completely engulfed, its dark form beginning to crumble under the relentless heat. Kiorn, caught up in the intensity of the moment, screams at Turan to keep his mind focused and to keep pouring his mana into the attack so the fire doesn't go out. He orders the boy to burn everything about the Wraith away until nothing remains. Turan's expression is one of absolute focus, his eyes fixed on the target as the flames reach a white-hot intensity. As the last traces of the Wraith vanish into ash, the clearing finally falls silent. Kiorn stands among the charred trees, looking up at the sky and reflecting on the fact that this was an absurdly strong Wraith, a threat that would normally require the power of a noble-class wizard to even stand a chance. He repeats the thought in his head, his eyes wide with awe as he looks at the young man standing amidst the ruins. He can hardly process the reality of what he just saw, staring at the empty space where the monster once stood and wondering if it's really over. He is left with the staggering realization that a simple shepherd from the mountains just did the impossible. Fresh off the magical nuke Turan just dropped to delete that Wraith, Kiorn is still breathing, which is honestly a miracle considering his hitbox was basically overlapping with the explosion. As the dust settles, Kiorn drops a pro tip for the rookie: if you don't want a vengeful spirit to respawn and ruin your afternoon again, you've got to loot the body and absorb the mana first. Turan, being the ultimate tutorial skipper, has to ask how that's even done, and Kiorn tells him to just imagine himself draining the energy into his own system. Turan closes his eyes and hits the confirm button, and suddenly, the monster's remains start glowing like a high-tier loot drop. The mana swirls into his palm in a bright green vortex, and Turan's eyes take on a cosmic, glowing effect as the energy surges through him. He's practically radiating green power veins, and Kiorn is officially shook. The veteran admits he can't believe his eyes, mentioning that Turan should feel a bit of pleasure from the absorption before realizing this simple shepherd just hit high-level stats on his very first attempt at mana consumption. Kiorn goes into a bit of a lore dump, explaining that while most wizards have to slowly grind their mana levels through age or by killing other casters, Turan is already handling power at a level that puts him in a completely different league. Kiorn pulls a total 180, shifting from traveling mentor to humble servant as he bows and asks Turan which noble house he actually belongs to. Turan looks incredibly awkward, sweating through the interaction and telling Kiorn to stop the formalities and just wipe the blood off his face first. Back at the cabin, the vibe is post-battle recovery mode, with Kiorn sporting a sling and some bandages. He keeps apologizing for making someone as esteemed as Turan help him, which earns him a sharp glare from the shepherd who just wants to get back to his quiet life. Kiorn can't let it go, though. He asks the million-dollar question: why would a wizard with game-breaking potential choose to live as a humble shepherd? Turan admits it was his mother's dying request, and to his surprise, Kiorn actually calls her wise instead of calling it overprotective parenting. Kiorn explains the harsh reality of their world's power scaling: great power inevitably brings conflict. He recounts a massive war from 20 years ago between the House of Erebayan and the House of Zahar, where nearly a third of the Erebayan knights were wiped out. Turan looks somber as Kiorn reveals that everyone close to him, his friend who wanted to open a laundry shop, his teacher, and even his wife and son, were massacred by House Zahar while he alone survived. Kiorn admits Turan's mother was right to keep him hidden because a knight's life can vanish more meaninglessly than a commoner's in the crossfire of noble wars. However, he tells Turan that his mother was wrong about one thing: his aptitude. Kiorn notes that even as a skilled knight, he couldn't bring down that Wraith, yet Turan destroyed it with ease. He delivers his final verdict with total conviction: Turan's potential isn't just that of a knight, at a minimum, he is noble level. Picking up from Kiorn's assessment, he looks at Turan and doubles down, stating that among those with potential, Turan possesses at least an upper-tier aptitude. The revelation hits Turan hard. He looks up at the traveler and asks if the story his mother told him, that his father was merely a knight, was actually a lie. Kiorn clarifies that it isn't necessarily a lie. On rare occasions, a child with power far below their station is born to nobles, just as a noble-class child can occasionally be born among the knightly class. Because of this rare gift, Kiorn tells Turan directly that it would be better for him to leave his isolated hill and finally go out into the world. When Turan asks a simple "why?", Kiorn explains the dire state of their reality. He notes that humanity desperately needs more powerful nobles and knights because humans are still not the complete masters of the world. Long ago, other races were pushed out by the gods, and they are still lurking in the shadows, waiting for any chance to rise again and reclaim what they lost. Instead of preparing for this threat, the current nobles spend all their time and energy waging war against each other. This is why the world is in an age that desperately needs strong and kind nobles who actually care about the people, just like Turan. Kiorn looks around the humble cabin and asks Turan point-blank if he is truly satisfied living the rest of his life as a simple shepherd. Turan remains silent, his expression unreadable as he considers the weight of the wizard's words. He asks what exactly he could hope to gain, below the mountain, and Kiorn tells him that the answer depends entirely on what he wants, whether it's wealth, fame, authority, family, or even just friendship. Any of those things are nearly impossible to find while hiding out here in isolation. Kiorn starts to head for the door, telling Turan to just try imagining the possibilities. He suggests that Turan could wander as a free spirit, destroying the monsters that threaten innocent people, or perhaps become an explorer venturing into the unknown. There's even the path of being adopted into a noble house to walk the true path of power. Standing outside under the vast sky, Turan finally admits that Kiorn is right, it would be far more interesting than herding sheep on the same hill forever. For the first time in his life, he is seriously curious about the world beyond the village. Kiorn smiles, though he admits he worries he might be planting unfair expectations in the boy's head. Regardless, he promises to support every possibility Turan chooses. Then, he realizes he skipped a major step and asks what Turan's bloodline ability is. Turan is confused, so Kiorn explains that a bloodline ability is a specific trait inherited from the divine ancestors known as the Freyans. It is the one thing that truly separates the noble class from the knights. He asks if there was ever a spell that felt unusually easy, or perhaps a natural, outstanding ability that doesn't even require mana to use. Turan remains humble, suggesting that he isn't actually that strong, he just assumes that having mana naturally makes a wizard's physical abilities more powerful. When pressed for anything unique, he mentions he has a good nose and is pretty good at throwing stones. Kiorn considers this, noting that an exceptional sense of smell can indeed be considered a bloodline ability. He mentions that while being skilled with thrown weapons is a well-known trait of House Arabayan, it's a fairly common skill overall. He asks Turan to tell him more, and as Turan begins to explain, the atmosphere shifts. Suddenly, Kiorn's demeanor changes, becoming cold and incredibly serious. Turan asks why he's acting so strange, but Kiorn simply states that he thinks he knows which great house Turan's abilities are actually closest to. Turan's curiosity is piqued, and he asks which house it is. Kiorn looks toward the horizon and names a great house known as the Pursuers, or the Hunters. It is House Zahar, the very house that fought a brutal, bloody war with Kiorn's own House Arabayan. Turan can only stare in stunned silence as the realization of his potential lineage, and its violent history, finally begins to sink in. The name drops like a heavy anchor, House Zahar. Turan is frozen, his mind racing as he tries to process the weight of the revelation. He looks at Kiorn, his expression a mix of shock and guilt, asking if he's really from the same bloodline as the people who destroyed the elder's life. His thoughts are a mess, he wonders if he should apologize for the actions of relatives he's never even met. To him, they are practically strangers, but the blood tie feels like a permanent debuff he didn't ask for. Kiorn, sensing the kid's internal spiral, breaks the silence. He tells Turan not to make such a worried expression, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. Turan is still reeling, pointing out that even if Kiorn wasn't in that war personally, the history between their houses is still there. But Kiorn just smiles, brushing it off as an adult situation. He explains that if they try to wash blood with blood, the cycle of violence will just keep looping, it's the ultimate zero-sum game. The conversation shifts as Kiorn catches Turan's gaze. He asks if Turan has any regrets, specifically about being told to leave his isolated hill and head into the world. But Turan realizes he's not being judged for his lineage, Kiorn trusts his character. Kiorn sees the goodness in him, especially because Turan chose to save him even at the risk of revealing a secret identity he'd hidden his entire life. Kiorn even suggests that if someone like Turan rose to power in the Zahar family, it could actually prevent another terrible war from breaking out. Either way, Kiorn tells him not to overthink it yet, it's not like he has to join the Zahars this second. But for Turan, the path forward has finally cleared. He looks out over the landscape and declares that he wants to try going down the mountain. Kiorn is clearly pleased, though he advises that they shouldn't rush it. Turan, being the genuinely good person he is, insists they wait until Kiorn's injuries heal before they start their journey. Back inside the cabin, the vibe shifts into a deep dive tutorial on the game's core mechanics. Kiorn explains that mana is essentially the key to omnipotence, the fundamental fuel required for all magic. Turan is skeptical of the omnipotent label, noting that you still need mana that specifically matches the magic you're trying to cast. Kiorn agrees and begins a masterclass on the 3 factors that determine magic's difficulty. First is bloodline. It's the RNG stats you're born with. For example, Turan can't just cast a high-level heal on Kiorn's wounds because it's not in his kit. But for the Ravista bloodline from the south, healing is basically a passive ability they can do without any training. Second is affinity, or familiarity. It's the concept that a mage performs better with tasks they actually enjoy or are used to. It's why Turan's fireball was so insanely fast. He wasn't just casting a spell, he was treating it like his practice stone throwing. Kiorn confirms that if he'd just tried a standard fire spell, the firepower and speed wouldn't have been nearly as impressive. Finally, Kiorn drops the most important factor, causality. This is the high-level theory that even a veteran like him doesn't fully grasp. He asks Turan what would happen if he tried to kill him directly using raw mana. The answer? Probably just some useless light shining from his head. Causality is the hidden mechanic that bridges the gap between raw power and a world-changing effect, and as they sit in the quiet of the cabin, it's clear that Turan's journey is about to involve a lot more than just throwing rocks. Kiorn continues the lesson on the mechanics of magic, hovering his hand over a wooden mug to demonstrate the sparks of magical static. He explains that failing to establish causality leads to unstable phenomena, especially when a mage tries to achieve a difficult outcome without an appropriate cause. Turan watches the display and starts to see the pattern, admitting that he's beginning to understand the concept. He reasons that if he wanted to kill someone like Kiorn, it would be far more natural to provide a direct cause of death, like creating and shooting flames, rather than just spending mana to wish for their end. Kiorn is visibly impressed by the shepherd's quick wit, laughing that Turan could have easily been a scholar instead of a mage. Turan, however, is still stuck on a technicality. He can control ordinary animals at will, so he wonders why magical beasts require this extra step of causality. Kiorn explains that it all comes down to the presence of mana within the creature itself. Outside the cabin, the peaceful scenery remains unchanged, but inside, the level of the conversation is shifting from basic survival to high-level theory. Turan reflects on how magic certainly isn't easy, but Kiorn reminds him that a truly excellent mage must understand the principles and situations behind the power, not just the mana itself. The conversation turns toward the specifics of Turan's potential heritage, with Turan asking if the Zahar bloodline possesses any unique magic. Kiorn confirms that their bloodline is legendary for being skilled in stealth and tracking. Eager to test this theory, Kiorn tells Turan to give it a try right now. Turan closes his eyes, focusing his will on becoming a ghost. He wishes for neither sound nor smell to be detected, wanting to remain completely unseen by others. The magic activates with a subtle swish as Turan's form begins to blur into the background. Kiorn watches with bated breath, asking if the spell actually worked. The cabin suddenly feels much emptier as Kiorn finds himself standing alone by the table, with only a faint shimmer on the rug indicating where Turan once stood. Kiorn admits that the boy succeeded, marveling at the fact that he literally cannot see him. He swallows hard in disbelief, realizing just how terrifyingly effective the Zahar traits truly are. The cabin stands silent for a moment longer as Turan maintains the veil. Finally, Turan fades back into reality, his physical form shimmering into existence. Kiorn admits that even after all these years, seeing that ability is still frightening, noting that during the war, the Arabian knights feared the Zahar stealth more than anything else. While he admits the ability is unfairly powerful, Kiorn warns Turan that it isn't invincible and offers to teach him a few magic training methods to round out his skills. Turan pauses, asking the obvious question, why would a veteran mage teach so much to someone from an enemy family? Kiorn reminds him that Turan saved his life and even treated his wounds after the battle. Placing a hand over his heart, Kiorn declares that he trusts Turan's character regardless of his last name. The scene shifts from the isolation of the hill to the village square, where the village chief is having a complete meltdown. He is stunned that Turan is actually selling his sheep and leaving, frantically asking who is going to do the shepherding and why the village wasn't consulted first. Turan is entirely done with the drama, telling the villagers they should have figured out how to find a new shepherd themselves. He points out that he can do whatever he wants with his own belongings and tells them they had better buy the sheep at a fair price. If they don't, Turan threatens to just release the entire flock into the wild and walk away, leaving the village with nothing. The chief and the other villagers look at the scarred man beside Turan and realize they have zero leverage. The chief thinks to himself that Turan is a man who keeps his word, and there is absolutely nothing to gain from irritating him further. Grudgingly, he hands over a heavy bag of coins, officially buying Turan's freedom. Turan and Kiorn begin the long walk away from the village, with Kiorn telling him that he is free to do whatever he wants now. Turan mentions that the villagers still technically owe Kiorn compensation for his services, and asks if he should go back and collect it by force. Kiorn just smiles, stating he had no intention of taking their money since it was Turan who actually caught the beast. Turan offers a rare smile of his own, satisfied with the outcome. They reach a fork in the road deep in the forest, and Kiorn stops, announcing that they must finally part ways here. Turan stands at the edge of the forest, the weight of the parting hanging heavy in the air. He looks at Kiorn and simply says, "Thank you for everything." The veteran knight offers a final, warm smile, telling him to take care. Turan watches him, addressing him as "Elder" one last time, and expresses his hope that when their paths eventually cross again, it will be with smiling faces. He remains there for a long time, rooted to the spot, as he watches Kiorn's retreating figure slowly disappear into the distance. As the silence of the woods settles around him, Turan finally begins to realize why he felt so uncomfortable when the old knight spoke to him with such formality. While he never lacked for affection from his mother, he realizes that he had secretly been yearning for a father figure, someone who could serve as a role model for the kind of man he should actually become. With that realization weighing on his mind, he turns away from the forest and begins his own journey. The lush greenery eventually fades into a harsh, unforgiving wasteland. The wind whistles through jagged stone canyons, kicking up clouds of dust and sand that blur the horizon. Turan moves steadily through the barren landscape, his white cloak fluttering in the gale as he navigates the rocky terrain. His sharp eyes catch a movement in the distance, and he spots a small group of figures moving across the sand. He wonders if they are traveling merchants who move from village to village and decides it's a good opportunity to ask for directions. As he approaches, a man with a scarred face and an eye patch stops, demanding to know who has the nerve to block their path. Turan remains calm and polite, explaining that he is traveling alone and simply wants to know where the nearest city is. The man tells him that if he follows the road they just came from, he'll eventually reach a city called Murai. Turan thanks them for the information and prepares to move on, but the sound of a heavy footstep stops him in his tracks. The leader of the group looms over him, asking if he really thinks he can just leave after getting what he wanted. He tells Turan that if someone receives something, they are expected to give something in return. The sound of steel ringing out fills the canyon as the group draws their swords, surrounding Turan in an instant. The leader orders him to take off his bulging bag, and when Turan asks if they are bandits, the man only laughs. He calls Turan's attempt to walk alone recklessness, noting that in a wasteland like this, no one would find it strange if a person simply vanished. While the blade is held to his throat, the leader tells Turan to strip off his bag and cloak while they are being nice, claiming that killing him and stripping the body would just be an unnecessary amount of work. Turan realizes he's dealing with bandits who have no qualms about murder. However, as the killers close in, his mind flashes back to the quiet cabin on Hizril Hill. He remembers Kiorn sitting across from him, demonstrating the principles of fire and the complex laws of causality that govern a wizard's power. Instead of showing fear, a dark, determined smirk spreads across Turan's face. He looks at the armed men and realizes that since he needs to refine his new skills, these bandits have provided the perfect opportunity for some live practice.